Police Story is the 20th episode of the third season of Frasier. This is directed by Philip Charles MacKenzie, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode, explain what happens, and share some thoughts. And this one takes place on Frasier's birthday, but he's not having a very jolly day. It actually starts off with him in the car with Roz, and he was going a little bit too fast, so he gets stopped by a cop. This is a cop called Maureen, played by Jane Kaczmarek, and things don't exactly go his way. He tries to use his celebrity to get out of the ticket, doesn't work. The next thing we know, he's at home, and Daphne, Martin, and Niles, and Eddie's also at the table, are giving him his birthday cake. He blows out the candles. There are those candles that light themselves again, or they don't blow out. Everything's very lighthearted. Frasier's clearly not in a particularly celebratory mood, but nevertheless, he is doing the best with the situation, and it's kind of an interesting thing because I feel like Frasier loves attention, or at least recognition, but when it comes to things like birthdays and getting that kind of attention, it's not something he seems to really enjoy very much, and I think that's rather fascinating. And he can't get his mind off of Maureen, the police officer, and he manages to convince Martin to phone the station to try and find out who it was. That's when we find out that this was Maureen. And the person that Martin speaks to says that she's probably down at the bar at this point. So they decide, Frasier and Martin, to head down to the cop bar. And Frasier goes off, and Martin is alone with Maureen for a bit. And it takes her a second, but then she remembers. She remembers Martin from a talk or something he gave at one of her trainings when she was just starting out. And they get off to a really good start, and they get on really well. And then she gets paged. She has to leave. And she asks Martin if he wants to go for a beer or grab something to eat at some point. And I think she did a great thing. She said, "No pressure, here's my number." And I love that. I think any request for a date should end like that, because then the person isn't in a position of having to answer there and then. Granted, if you are the one requesting it, you're in the position of having to wait by the phone for the answer. But I feel like that was a very respectful thing to do, because Martin clearly was going to be in an awkward position, and I definitely think she did the right thing. However, Martin is still feeling very awkward about this, and he actually meets Niles at Cafe Nervosa. We have a great interaction with the waitress and the whole biscotti cookie thing. It's such a small part of the episode, but I liked it. Niles was delighted that Martin was asking him for advice, and I think Niles gave good advice. I think he did. He suggested that Martin goes out on this date with her, just meets her for a drink or whatever, and if he feels like there's a spark, if this is something he wants to pursue, then he can discuss it with Frasier. The thinking there is that there's no point in potentially upsetting Frasier if it's not going to become anything anyway. I feel like that was probably good advice. However, that does leave itself open to the scenario of Martin going on a date with her, realising there's a spark, telling Frasier, and then Frasier saying, "No, I don't want you to go ahead with this." And then Martin is stuck in an equally awkward situation. But given how the episode played out, I definitely think that was the right decision. And Daphne, a little later on, Daphne is at home with some friends. Frasier is actually meant to be down at KCL. He's leaving a little later, and I think just to get him out of the apartment, Daphne and her friends, I apologise if you can hear my cat meowing, there's a bird outside the window and she wants the bird. Daphne and her friends suggest that Frasier goes down to the bar where Maureen probably is, and really encourages him to go after her and see if it'll work, and he thinks this is a good idea. So before he heads down to the station, he goes to the bar. And initially it's not awkward because Frasier sees Martin and Maureen, but he also hears Martin being very positive about somebody. Now we, the viewer, know he's not talking about Frasier, but all Frasier hears is Martin saying all of these wonderful compliments about, well, Frasier assumes it's about him, and he approaches them and says, "Maureen, I promise I didn't put him up to this." And this is when it gets a bit awkward, of course, because we know that they weren't talking about him. Frasier doesn't, and he has to find out that it's a date. It's definitely awkward for Frasier, but I feel like it's probably more uncomfortable for Martin, because Martin's certainly not used to putting himself out like that and being quite open and meeting people like this in a potentially romantic way. So I feel like Martin would have been so much out of his comfort zone. And I think things, within the context of the episode, I think the narrative went in the way it probably should have done. Frasier, again, not really agreeing with that. He goes to KCL and Roz is actually there with a bunch of people from the station. They're planning to yell surprise and eat some cake, and Frasier comes in and they all hide in Roz's booth, and Frasier, obviously unaware that they're there, is ranting about his day, saying all of these things that he probably doesn't want other people other than Roz to hear. Again, we the viewer know that there are other people there, but Frasier has no idea. And eventually they yell surprise, and I rather enjoyed it. It was a nice way to conclude the episode, or pretty much conclude the episode. We actually end with Frasier sleeping on the sofa and Martin creeping in the house and Eddie jumping on Frasier, which is just, it's a delight. I love it when animals jump on the bed and they completely just land on top of you. That sounded sarcastic. I genuinely love it because the animal has arrived. Such a beautiful moment. But not when you're Frasier with your feelings towards Eddie. A really good episode. Definitely very thought-provoking with regards to Martin's position. I'd love to know if you have a strong opinion on whether you think Martin was right to proceed with the date, because at the end of the day, maybe he shouldn't have done. Because if you date somebody your friend is interested in, it's kind of an unwritten rule that you don't do that. So surely the same would apply for father and son. If your son is interested in dating somebody, even if they're not interested in them, you don't date that person. But at the same time, would Frasier want Martin to be denied a potentially positive romantic relationship when he wasn't going to stand a chance with Maureen anyway? I don't think there's a clear answer to that. But if you have any strong feelings either way, I'd love to know what you think. I don't know. I did think about it for a bit when Niles was talking to Martin, and I couldn't come to a definite conclusion. So if you have any thoughts, do let me know. But personally, I'm in the middle, I'm on the fence, but I'm not on the fence about the episode. Really enjoyable, really thought-provoking, great to see quite a lot of Martin in this episode, and obviously we get a decent amount of Niles. I loved the scene at Cafe Nervosa with Niles and Martin in the Waitress. I just thought it played out really beautifully. Nice amount of Daphne as well, decent amount of Roz. Some different locations as well. When we go down to the bar, it's always nice to have a change of pace. I have no complaints. I think that Police Story is definitely a pretty good episode.